and do a little bit of introduction before because we're starting a little late because of technical difficulties, but I'm very glad that you're here. This is Shahin and Samiei. Said that right, correct. Look at that. I really didn't want to mess that up. He is the works for the Tennessee Equality Project.
Yes, volunteer with them.
Volunteer with them. Also, most of his work has been in public health and advocacy for communities across the state. He is a graduate of the University of Memphis, which we love here in Memphis, and he is a native Memphian. We are delighted that he is here to talk to us a bit about LGBTQIA+ realities and advocacies here in the state of Tennessee. The last couple of years have been rough for the LGBTQ+ community, and in particular, the last year has been traumatizing and frightening in very many ways, with the laws that are being passed locally and statewide and a number of other issues. So we are very, very glad that you're here to be able to share with us some ways that we can enlighten ourselves, that we can be better friends, allies, and fellow journey people along the way as we follow where God is leading us. So I encourage us, let's open in prayer, and then I will get out of your hair. Let's pray, friends. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for the gift that is this day. We thank you for your call into our life to continually hear where you are leading us, to step into difficult conversations, into difficult locations, to create space for people whose voices are unheard and mistreated in our communities. We ask that you be here with us, present in this room. Open our hearts and our minds that we might learn and discern your will more clearly, that we can better love and serve you and our neighbor here in Memphis and around the world. Amen.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Sincerely. I just want to first thank you all for having me this morning and allowing me to come and talk about some of these issues that do affect us here in our state. And so I'll give you all a little introduction. Who the heck am I? What is Tennessee Equality Project? What do we do? What are the kinds of issues that our community is facing across the state? And then what does advocacy look like? Is it effective? What are some strategies people can do? How do people tap into this thing, even if you've never seen it or done it before? And just as a little brief background, which I really appreciate the introduction. I'm a native Memphian, proud graduate of the University of Memphis, where I received my undergraduate and graduate degrees. And started working there right after I started graduating in research, looking first at predictors of early childhood experiences, how those can predict kindergarten readiness and later academic achievement among our community. And then now, currently, I work as an associate director of research in a center that focuses on mobile sensors, so things that are wearable, that can detect stuff about health and well-being, and how you can leverage that to help people live happier, healthier lives. But I'm not talking about any of that today. I'm talking about my volunteer side of my life that I really am very proud to do and be a part of in our community, because it is very much needed. I volunteer as the Shelby County Committee Chair for the Tennessee Equality Project. And so I help to organize here locally for issues that affect us across the state. And I'm going to get into what that means in just a moment. Previously, I volunteered with other organizations. I was a transit advocate when I was transit dependent. I was on the bus for many years in college and afterwards. And that's a challenging situation living here in Memphis. And so I was really blessed really to have that organization and being able to tap in and learn, really cut my teeth on advocacy in such a thing that was so near and dear to my heart. And now here we are, kind of, in a sense, these are, I don't want to say bigger issues, but doing similar thing in a much different context. And all of this is volunteer, so I'll volunteer. Tennessee Equality Project is a statewide organization, a non-for-profit organization that focuses on LGBTQ public policy. It was founded in the mid-2000s when the state was considering an amendment to define marriage as that which is between one man and one woman. The amendment process takes about 2 years, hence between 2004 and 2006. That did pass into law, and our state only recognized marriages between one man and one woman until the Supreme Court overturned that kind of legislation in 2015. Since that amendment did pass into law, the organization evolved to look at LGBT issues at the local and the state levels primarily, because we have some organizations that function at the federal levels, that deal with the United States Congress, that deal with the White House, that deal with the Supreme Court. but there was a real gap in terms of state and local representation, especially in states like ones here in the South. And our main focus, we work throughout the year to do things like this to help provide education, to provide empowerment to our community. But our big focus is often during legislative session, which is roughly the first half of each calendar year. That's when the legislature is in Nashville. They're actively considering bills, passing bills, amending bills, delaying bills, canceling bills, all that kind of stuff. That's when we're really working very, very hard. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. And so a lot of times, especially prior to this legislative session, I would get that question, why, what is the point? What's going on? Isn't this over? Right? What is it that you're fighting for? What are you advocating for? And isn't this over? And the answer bluntly is no. In 2015, when the Supreme Court handed down that decision in Advocacy v. Hodges, that established rules about marriage equality, right? And marriage is very, very important. Don't get me wrong. There are tax implications, social implications, equality implications, extremely important, but it had nothing to do with any of the other facets of our lives, like healthcare, like education, like access to housing, employment issues. You could still be hired, fired, promoted, or demoted based on who you are, who you love, rather than the merits of the job that you're doing. And so a patchwork of policies began to pop up across this country where you could be hired, fired, promoted, demoted based on your sexual orientation in one state and then cross into another state line and have protections. And that patchwork of policies still exists to this day, so that in Tennessee, the rules are different from in Vermont. These issues are compounded in terms of discrimination for the tails of our age groups, our youngest and our oldest generations, and for people in other marginalized categories, looking at racial minorities and sexual and particularly gender minorities. Gender diverse individuals face these issues in a more compounded way. And this impacts our lives and our what are called social determinants of health, our ability to access and our ability to live happy, healthy, strong, well-being lives. And still, we're seeing we need more civic participation on this and other issues around it. In Shelby County, our voter turnout rates have been about 30% in the past 2 to 3 elections. And I'm not talking about kids. I'm not talking about people who are incarcerated. I'm talking about people who live here with an active voter registration. Every right, every ability, every bit of access to go vote. We're talking about 3 in 10 people are deciding who makes these decisions about our lives. So just want you all to think about that for a minute. Now, again, sadly, a lot of our work is on the defensive side and it's on the state level. We talk about this annual slate of hate that changes from year to year in terms of its focus. You probably have seen in the news issues about drag bands, drag performers. That really did reach the national, even international zeitgeist to really hit the media, and people began to really get aware of it in a way that they often haven't before. But these issues, these discriminatory bills have been coming out every year for a very long time. This year, we're looking at these bans on drag shows and performers. Transgender issues have really risen to the top, and particularly those that affect our youth and the areas of schooling, in athletics, in healthcare. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But whether you're going to respect somebody's pronouns or their preferred name, whether they're going to be able to participate in different kinds of athletic programs, and whether they can even access certain kinds of healthcare that their doctors may think they should access, but the state does not. We've seen a lot of censorship issues coming about in school libraries, in schools, in non-school libraries, bills that are trying to minimize different kinds of content in those areas. And there are perennial attacks on same-sex marriage, because we know that the Supreme Court looks a lot different now than it did 8 years ago. And we know full well that precedent can be overturned. We've seen that very recently. And some of these people would just be thrilled to get this issue back before the Supreme Court to get them to look at it again. And I want to highlight that this isn't an accident, right? When 19, 20, 21 states every year are considering basically the exact same piece of legislation, this kind of stuff is coming out of conservative think tanks, places like ALEC, others like it. And what they do is you think about it like the spaghetti against the wall approach. They'll write up model legislation, they'll send it to who they think are amenable legislators. They'll try it, they'll see what passes where, they'll see what fails where and when and how in the process. And basically use states like Tennessee, Florida, Texas, our southern states as laboratories to see what works where, try it again next year. And so again, this is really not an accident. This is happening across the country. We're not the only ones dealing with it, which is something I find to be a little affirming. We're not alone in this, but this is a big, where is this coming from? This is a big beast behind the scenes. And so this year, as you probably saw, that first really big push was against gender affirming healthcare for our trans youth and against drag performers. They filed these specific bills, 2 distinct bills, the day after Election Day in 2022, which is often a sign that this is going to be a priority for them. They were kind of firing that shot across your bow, right? Saying, we're going to do something about this. And these bills moved at breakneck speed. It's really quite, in terms of social policy, pretty unprecedented in this state. They had an agenda. So these did capture our attention. And that's the only silver lining of that, is that they captured the attention of the community to say, hey, whoa, this is going on. Are you okay with this? Are you not okay with this? Whereas a lot of state issues sometimes tend to fly under the radar until they happen. So if there's any silver lining, it has been that we're becoming aware, but there are many, many other bills that they are proposing that affect people's lives. I'm breaking the cardinal rule here of throwing all of this text, very, very small font here. No, you're not going to get quizzed on this later. I'm throwing all these bills up behind me to illustrate the point of how much our legislature is proposing that directly affects the LGBTQ community. There are the 2 bills that I mentioned that are dealing with gender affirming care and drag. Those both did pass. They're in litigation in different steps. So the gender affirming care ban is currently in effect. The drag ban is not. There are other bills that they proposed affecting drag that basically said you had to get a license to be a drag performer. That bill fortunately did fail. Issues where they define sex in statute that could have issues as to whether, if you're transgender, what's going to happen if you need to get your driver's license, or if you need to change your gender marker on a certain piece of government document, are you going to run into an issue? Issues with respect to insurance. If you're a managed care organization or an insurance company that provides gender affirming care in California, our state's considering, well, you can't do business with us in Tennessee to be 10 care providers, our state Medicaid program. Fortunately, that bill is delayed right now. But these are the different kinds of issues that we're facing that affect people's access to healthcare, that affect people's access to the basic social determinants and provisions of their day-to-day lives. The perennial attacks on marriage equality. These are 10 that I've identified. There are another 10 behind it that we've identified, that we're tracking, and that we're going to continue fighting. But I, again, highlight this to say that the 2 bills we all heard about in the news are the tip of the iceberg, and that new things come out every single year when they get into session that affect our community. And that's why it's so important for us to be aware. And this isn't some esoteric thing about rights and philosophy, and that's extremely important, but it also affects people's health and well-being and their lifespan, right? We know that marginalization hurts people. We've seen in LGBT couples that really hurts people. That's the first study I've cited here. And we know that coupling is a protective factor. So this marginalization hurts individuals even more so. We know that our populations face these increased risks of violence, depression, substance abuse, STIs, all kinds of other issues, and discrimination negatively impacts people's protective factors, their access to healthcare, their access to stable employment that protects them against these negative issues, right? And we've even seen that the perception of a policy hostile situation can discourage people from accessing, for example, mental health care services. Even whether or not there is someone's discriminating against you, if someone thinks the situation's too hot, I don't want to engage with it, even though I might need those services. So, and even the use case of COVID-19, we see that the LGBT population specifically has faced worse outcomes. And looking into it, our researchers have seen that social determinants of health have really been the driving factor behind those increased marginalization forces. But there are protective factors out there. There are things that we can do to help protect our communities. Knowing that we have access to transgender affirming healthcare can protect our youth. It is protective against suicidality. Even one affirming individual in an LGBT individual's life can be protective. That can really help someone. Knowing you've got someone who's got your back makes a big difference. That's true for our seniors as well. We know that social capital is critical. We saw that magnified during the pandemic. And we know that the major accreditation body, the Joint Commission on Healthcare, has been looking at this for well over a decade. And we see that when people have and they feel access to equal rights in their healthcare, they have better outcomes. Like, wow, what do you do? Big surprise there. But the research backs all of this up. And so how do we engage with this issue? What can we do with this big, hairy yarn ball of complex issues? There are all kinds of different ways. There's kinds of, the research and education side of things. One of the things that we're doing here today, learning and talking about these issues. What do these bills do? How does government work? Getting people registered to vote, that first step in the door to getting people engaged civically, and then connecting individuals with their elected officials, getting them to understand that these relationships are so critical in advocacy and letting them know what's important to us and to our communities. There are all kinds of campaigns and things that we do with TDP that I'll talk about in a minute. And sometimes people just like to protest and get in the street. That all makes a difference, right? But I do want to highlight a example of how this is not all defensive. And 10 plus years ago, there was a non-discrimination ordinance that the city of Memphis was considering, not for all employees in the city limits, just for city of Memphis employees, if you're employed by the city. And this ordinance included protections for people's sexual orientation and gender identity. And it was a very arduous campaign. I was just a young little neophyte, just kind of showing up in my advocacy thing, showing up at city council chambers because people I respected asked me to do that. And seeing that process lay out in front of me was very formative for my own advocacy. And during the readings of those ordinances, you have to have 3 readings for an ordinance to pass into law at the city level. There were kind of factions who were saying, well, I think we have the votes for sexual orientation, but we don't have the votes for gender identity. Let's just compromise and get what we can get out of it. And I remember the leadership at the time saying, absolutely not. We're either all walking through this window of opportunity together, or we're not walking through it at all, because nobody's coming back for anybody. Like, this is our chance. And during the course of that debate and negotiation, one of the more conservative city council individuals said so much that if these policies are good enough for FedEx, why on earth are they not good enough for the city of Memphis? And ultimately, he voted for it, as did others, and the ordinance passed into law. And it really highlighted for me that this kind of effort can make a difference, and it can work when people work together, coalesce our power, and show what we need. So why on earth does advocacy feel so darn complicated? And that's an issue that people deal with all the time. And it's because of the way our government is set up to work, right? It's designed to divide power, to disseminate it out so that no one group can have too much power. It's designed to prevent tyranny and all that good stuff. That's great. It also makes things complicated. And when people don't understand what's going on, they don't engage with it. And so I want to highlight what it is we're actually doing here. What is it that we're talking about? And if you think about like a 2-dimensional circle, a little pie, right, we separate our government into 3 little sections, right? An executive branch that's designed to do laws, a legislative branch that makes those laws, and a judicial branch that considers, adjudicates, decides, and interprets those laws. And so I think we all have a good understanding of what that looks like. But then we have the levels of government that make things a little bit more 3-dimensional. We have the federal level. We think about the US Congress, the presidency, the Supreme Court. The state level, governorships, our Tennessee General Assembly, the Wyoming state legislature, right? And our local levels, which city councils, county commissions, and then we have sublocal areas, school boards, things like that. And so our big focus here is on legislative advocacy, mostly at the state level. And why is this so complicated? Because it's hard. Like, I want to acknowledge that. This is a challenging thing for people to understand, because if you live in Memphis, how many of us live in the city limits? Just show of hands. You have 10 legislative officials that answer to you. And I like that because it's a nice round number. It's 11 if you count the school board. Can you name them all? Right, little cheat sheet. You have 4 city council people, 1 county commissioner, 1 Tennessee state rep, 1 Tennessee senator, who we're going to focus on primarily for the purposes of this, 1 US House representative, your Steve Cohen, David Kustoff, and 2 US senators. All right, right. And so I highlight that to say, this is complicated. Give yourself that grace if you don't know everything all at once, because that's not how it's designed to be. But organizations like ours are designed to help bridge that gap. And since our focus is to defend LGBT rights, and that's happening at the state level, it's important to know who your people are, who answer to your interests in Nashville. You're welcome to do this activity right now, where you can go to your phone, get on your computer, and go to Capitol, it's an ol.tn.gov, and use the Find My Legislator function. And what you'll see is a map here of all of the different Senate and House districts across the state. You put your address in and you find who your people are. 2 individuals who answer to you in Nashville. This is a way you can begin to know who they are. You can begin to build those relationships and contact them when things are happening. And I'll give you a quick primer on the legislature and how this whole thing works. We have a legislative session that lasts roughly, or the last 2 years, roughly January through May every year, in the first half of the calendar, with special sessions that sometimes do happen. We're looking at one that's going to happen in August, just next month. The House has 99 members, so the state is cut into 99 little places, right? That we all live in one of those 99 districts. And it's also cut into 33 districts on the Senate side, right? We elect the whole House every 2 years. We elect roughly half the Senate, every kind of staggered every 4 years. So every 2 years, we elect roughly half of the Senate. And how a bill becomes law when a legislator proposes a bill. A legislator on the House and the Senate side both have to do the same thing. It goes through some procedural motions, and then it gets into what's called the committee process. That's where we can fit in, and I'll illustrate what this process looks like. It gets debated, it gets amended, it might fail in the committee. Whatever happens, if the bills begin to advance, they make it to the full House, they make it to the full Senate. If they both vote on it and approve it, then it goes to the governor's office, right? All this other stuff is procedural stuff that's kind of in the way. And you can find how this process looks, again, on the Capitol's website. It's actually gotten awards for how well it's maintained, how well it's engineered, despite the content that's within it. It might not be so great. And it has, I'll illustrate some really great primers on how you can engage with your elected officials. So it's got some good tips and tricks. And I'll give you an example in the next 2 slides as to why our group can be helpful in this process. Again, you're not going to get quizzed on this. This was a bill that pertained to adoption a few years ago. And you can see here that there are all kinds of procedural things that happened along the way on the House side and on the Senate side. And each one of those red arrows were points of contact where committees were considering this bill, where individuals were voting on this, where decisions were being made. And at each one of these touch points were campaigns and opportunities for you to email, for you to make phone calls, for you to do letter writing, for you to in some way engage with this process to stop the bill or to say that I want this bill to pass. And that's what we do, is we make this process of all this convolution simple and easy so that you can tap in at the appropriate times when we can all make a difference. What we see here are, after the bills get voted on, again, they organize things very well as to how the votes turned out, who voted how did your elected official vote. Obviously, if you want to make a difference, you need to tell them before they vote on it, not after they vote on it. But if they voted on something that might have been politically difficult for them and they voted the right way, it's never a bad idea to pick up the phone and tell them thank you. If they voted the way you didn't want them to, you can tell them that and let them know, I'm watching and I'm seeing what you're doing for and about my community. And again, this resource is very powerful and we make things very easy to get people connected with it. And I remember it was in 2019 when there was a bathroom bill that was being considered in our K-12 or kindergarten through 12th grade, public schools. And that bill would have required students to use the bathroom or restroom facilities with the sex assigned at birth, right? So saying nothing for their gender identity. And my elected official on the House side, the state representative, was a former teacher and school administrator. And I knew that. And I had a meeting with him in his office in Nashville, and I was, talking about how would you feel if you were in the schools, you had to deal with the situation, just a very candid, what would you do? And he thought about it and he had a conversation and he agreed. This was a bill that would cause more problems than it would solve, right? And so here's a little cutout from the votes there. He said I wouldn't vote for the bill. And he said, I'll either vote no or present non-voting, which for all intents and purposes is a no vote. You want someone to stand up and say no, but it's the yes votes that carry legislation, right? He was the one member of his caucus that didn't vote on it. The bill, as you can see, got 72 ayes and sailed right on through the House floor. And so I see this and I say, well, whoopsie frickin' do. I was able to convince my House person not to vote for the bill, but that didn't make a darn bit of difference, did it? I was feeling kind of dejected, right? That this bill is going to pass. It's going to hurt students in our communities. I'm friends with families who this is going to affect. And this bill is going to go. Like you can see, overwhelmingly, that if people voted yes on it. But when I was talking with my elected official and people across the state were talking with their elected officials, considering we're a very long state, we have a lot of elected officials out there, those conversations that were being had all across the state, and then the conversations legislators were having with each other. Hey, I'm getting these phone calls. Hey, I'm getting these emails. Hey, I'm getting these messages. Parents are calling me and they're saying this is going to do X to my family, to my kid. On the Senate side, on the Senate floor, one of the Senate leaders at the time stood before the rest of the Senate and expressed all of that uncertainty to the rest of his colleagues to say, is this policy really going to help Tennessee? Is this going to move Tennessee forward? Or are we looking at unintended consequences for our children? And that bill was pushed back out to committee where it withered and failed. And that was a very illustrative moment to me, that it's not any one person, that it's the actions of people across the state that help to make these bills or break these bills. So what is it that you can do? Getting involved and getting knowledgeable about these things is step one. You're the expert on these issues that affect your life. We kind of have this mentality that elected officials know things. Well, they know a thing or two about a thing or two. They know how to get elected, right? But if you're a lawyer, if you're a business person, if you're a doctor, if you're a teacher, if you're an LGBT individual, if you're a movie maker, if you're whatever, you know about your issue. You're the expert on your issue. And you're empowered. Hell, you're even in some way required to bring that knowledge to the forefront and to let them know what's going on in and about our communities. And this change happens collectively. When we engage with our elected officials, whether it's about LGBT issues or the environment or education or public safety, that is how we can make change happen in this state. And we do need your help because these bills are getting more vitriolic. These bills are becoming more problematic. And during session, we have weekly email campaigns that take literally a minute to participate in. We have opportunities to phone bank that are often, they're virtual and after hours. So if you don't want to talk to somebody, you can leave a voicemail and we all kind of do it together virtually, or you can do it on your own. If you're like me and you want to talk to somebody and pick up the phone in the middle of the day, you can do it. We provide these scripts, we provide the information about the bill, what it is they do, and make it very, very easy for people to tap in. And if you want to meet with an elected official, you can contact us. We'll train you how to do it. And whether that's on your own or whether it's a day on the Hill where we all show up. And I believe we have to save the day already in February for our next day on the Hill when they're going to be in session. But you can meet with your elected officials anytime. You can reach out to them at any time. And we also need outreach volunteers, people to show up at events, to share this information with others, to keep the education perpetuated into our community so people can be empowered. Of course, monetary donations do help, but primarily your time and advocacy are what make the big difference, because it's when people show up, or they say 90% of it is just showing up, that is where we really can move the hearts and the minds and the votes of our elected officials to do the right thing for equality. Raising awareness about these issues with your networks, with your colleagues, with your friends, help to move this energy forward, because it is us doing this together that helps to make a big difference. Begin talking with your legislators. Do not think of them as celebrities, as untouchables. Their job is to listen to you. Their job is to represent us in government. And if we don't talk to them, they make decisions about us without us. And build a relationship with the person who picks up the phone, because they're the gatekeeper. Those administrative assistants, you would be surprised. They're not even always politically aligned with the people who they're working for. Oftentimes, they're very interested to hear what you have to say. And if you're courteous, kind, but firm, and articulate about what you're doing, halfway articulate. That's it. All you're looking for is halfway articulate and not me. They'll hear you. They'll put the phone down. Sometimes it's just a little check mark, right? They're looking at a bill. They're just looking at check marks of who's saying yes, who's saying no. But sometimes they'll get out of their chair. They'll walk over to the office that's behind them and they'll say, look, I really got this phone call from a constituent and this is how they feel. And sometimes you'll get a phone call back. Oftentimes you won't. But when you are present, again, attendance is 90% of the situation. You can begin to change people's hearts and minds. We have a number of resources that I can provide after the fact. We do a lot of work. Partners across the state do a lot of heavy lifting out Memphis here in town. They provide an amazing array of social services for our community. A number of national partners and national organizations help to provide information for our youth, for our seniors, for everybody within the age distribution.
Hey,
There
please make
are
sure your
resources
speaker is
out there that are
properly
outside of the
connected.
legislative advocacy
Now,
sphere
what the
that
hell?
also can help. But our focus mainly is
I know
on
what I bet it
legislative
is.
advocacy and
I
getting
turned it off over here.
mobilized to participate in the process, of which we have a process coming in the very near future. Our city elections are coming up, and our mayor, our city council, again, you have 4 city council people who represent you. They're all up for election. And these are people who, again, the state supersedes the city. So even if the city wants to say, hey, we want to go this way, state law overrides the city. But it's important to have people in city government who understand these issues. It's important to have people in city government who can lobby and advocate with our state level officials and to promote equality locally, because we know full well that the state is in a very vitriolic, hostile environment for our community, and having a place,
Okay, now you can get up.
a safe area in this little corner of our
It
state
shows us,
is important. So I really implore you to make sure that you're registered to vote, that your friends are registered to vote ahead of the deadline of September 5th. We're looking at 45 days we can start casting our first votes, give or take. Right. So be prepared. We'll be having surveys that come out in the near future about how different city candidates are responsive to LGBT issues, and those will be published out once we receive the information back. So become informed, be an informed voter. And if this issue of LGBT issues, those matter to you, pay attention and participate. This quote from Jimmy Carter, I had the real privilege of going down to the Jimmy Carter National Historic Park down there in Plains, Georgia, right, where you're 1.5 miles from their home where they still live, right? And I thought it was a really well done national park. And in the school where he went, there's this placard, there's this quote from him that really resonates with me and about this situation. My faith demands that I do whatever I can, wherever I am, whenever I can, for as long as I can, with whatever I have to try to make a difference. No one of us is supposed to be the Renaissance person with the Superman cape on to fix this problem single-handedly overnight all by yourself. You do what you can, how you can. And all of us doing that, what little or a lot that we have in us, is how we can make a difference, because we're doing this collectively. And so I just want to say thank you for this time. Thank you for the opportunity to come talk about these issues and ways you can fight back.
Where's the
And
equality
if you have
project?
questions, please feel free to ask them now, or my contact information is here. Feel free to reach out in the future.
Time to go? No, we have time. I'm just standing up. I will dismiss everybody.
Oh,
but we're not done. We have questions.
Mark.
Two things. One, just for your own education, since we're in the Presbyterian Church, the federal government and the Tennessee government, all this is based on the Presbyterian government. A lot of people call the U.S. When they signed the Declaration, the War of Independence for the Presbyterians. And with that many Presbyterians involved, and our founding fathers who founded the government, they literally is based on our government.
That is
My hell is debate.
so you're going to be very happy that we don't based on the Quaker committee side of things. Believe me, we're never which I go to Quaker meetings. So I can
My question though is, like the drag show ban was just a very badly written bill. I mean, it was a bad bill information wise, but it was badly written.
yes.
Is there a fear that the folks who wrote it might actually do some thinking and say, okay, well, let's, we did wrong. And rewrite it where it might actually stand up to a lawsuit.
Always. And so that's one of the reasons our organization, it's the reason I volunteer with the organization, because we follow this stuff very closely. And when we put out action alerts, it's very important to hear them and to participate in them. Because the way our system of government works, especially here in Tennessee, is that things can change on a dime. Legislators can amend bills very quickly, and that they often will create these shell bills, right, that don't really have a lot of substance in them. And that way they can get the bill in before the filing deadline. And then you'll be several months into the process, and then they'll amend the bill into something very substantive, and it'll happen very quickly. And that you thought HB 374 was meaningless, now HB 374 makes a really big difference on your life. And so these things can move very quickly, and they can be amended quickly, and they can be modified from year to year, and that they can see, oh, well, this didn't work so well. Maybe we should try it this way. That didn't work so well, so maybe we can write it with this kind of language to see if it passes muster. So it's a very good question. Yes, they can, they will, so pay attention. It's important. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next week, we have John Ashworth speaking on his research on the economics of enslavement. And that's the last adult forum of the summer. The week after that is fall kickoff. So thank you all so much. Go in peace. And thank you.
Close out the
Zoom here.
Could I ask a question, please?